Today I would like to share with you some of my thoughts on sanding work in the lathe, which is much more than just holding sheets of abrasive against the spinning work. You have to use the correct kind of abrasives in the right way to get the job done in style. And sanding spindle work is quite different from sanding faceplate work. With spindle work, the grain of the wood is running between the centers of the lathe. So we are cutting directly across the grain all of the time. With good techniques, we can often start at 150 or 180 grit. If it's a tougher wood to turn, we might have to start at 120. The important thing in any wood sanding is to use the correct type of abrasive. You want either a garnet or an aluminum oxide paper, with the aluminum oxide being better today than garnet. And you want an open coat paper that only has about 70% of the surface covered by abrasives. This leaves spaces between the abrasives so that the debris from sanding, what you call swarth, has some place to go and not clog the paper. Finally, a coated paper that is coated with zinc styrate is much better than uncoated papers, for this lubricant keeps both finishes and the resins from wood from sticking to the paper and makes it last much longer. Let's start with our 120. I simply use 1/4 sheets because they're small and don't get tangled and the work is easy. I fold it in half. I start up the lathe, and this folded edge allows me to go right up to a shoulder, as we have here. It lets me get down into this groove and sand the root of this bobbin, and this half bead right here. I can roll that slightly to a rounded edge and sand this cove very easily. Sanding small hollow forms such as this are problematic. A great way to do it is simply take a piece of wood and cut a slot in it in a bandsaw, and a bandsaw it to the shape you need, and you simply wrap that around there and we'll be able to go right in there, work that around in there with the lathe running, and sand the inside of it as slick as a whistle. With faceplate work, the grain now runs across the center of the lathe, and twice a revolution we're cutting violently against the grain, so tear out at these areas is inevitable. With faceplate work, it's not if we sand, it's how much we have to sand. It's much easier to use a power sanding system, and I make up my own sanding mandrels by taking a 1/2 inch circle of plywood, 3 inches in diameter, and putting a carriage bolt through it and securing it with a nut and a fender washer. I then glue a piece of foam to that piece of plywood, and I get the foam from a kneeling pad that I buy at Bath, Bed & Beyond, and that's simply a kneeling pad for using in your garden. To that I cement a piece of hook Velcro. I get it from McMaster Carr in wide sheets. You can get it at Joann Fabrics, but often you have to use 2 strips. I run the lathe fairly slowly for this operation, and I try to have the abrasives run against the rotation of the piece. So this is rotating in a counterclockwise fashion as we look at it, and this is rotating clockwise, so by using the right hand side of this disc I will be going against the rotation of the piece. It's long been a wisdom in the turning community that sanding a bowl with water will make the sanding much more efficient. However, at this stage of making a bowl, we're usually trying to get water out of wood and not put it back into it. Also, if you're doing furniture parts such as a tabletop or something, it's not a very good plan to get it wet. So I one day accidentally discovered that by sanding after I had applied an oil finish made the sanding much more efficient. So I tried mineral spirits, and it works like a charm. I simply put some mineral spirits in a dish like this, and I now simply wet this good with mineral spirits, and I slow my lathe down so it isn't going real fast. I gotta fling this everywhere. And now I'll go back to power sanding at 120 grit, and then I'll hand sand as I just explained a few minutes ago. And the paper doesn't really load up nearly as bad. It sort of just comes off like putty. We can now simply add more mineral spirits, and we can hand sand with plain sandpaper. And theoretically, this isn't wet dry sandpaper, but we're not using it long enough that I've found a great problem with it. It seems to hold up just fine. I'll go to an oil finish as I get up to 180 and sand oil finish in the same way, and that oil finish with the wood dust will dry, and it gives a much smoother finish much more quickly. So wet sanding, give it a try. It's a great technique.